In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, more than 1,500 kilometers away from Lisbon, lies the Portuguese archipelago of the Azores. While renowned for its high atmospheric pressure, known as the Azores High, this remote paradise holds a captivating secret on one of its islands, called Pico, a vineyard unlike any other in the world. Its intricate maze of walls stretching across vast acres of planted vines, set a couple of meters from the ocean's waves, and producing a wine with unique characteristics, have fascinated people for over 5 centuries. A wine tradition and vineyard so cherished that it was inscribed on the prestigious UNESCO World Heritage List. Not forgotten, Pico Wine used to grace the palates of American revolutionaries and the mighty Tsars of Russia. It was a liquid gold sought after by the global elite. Join me on an extraordinary journey as we revisit the incredible history of this unique wine and meet the intrepid winemakers of Pico Island. Welcome to Pico Wine, the king of wines and wine of kings. When I first arrived to Pico from the neighboring island of Faya, I was very surprised to see how different it felt compared to the other Azorean islands I had visited before. Pico felt wilder and rawer, with its volcanic nature clearly visible everywhere the eyes could see. It didn't feel like a place that should have been welcoming for people to settle and even less to grow vines and make wine. Even in the Azores, Pico has a special status. It is home to the highest mountain in Portugal, the 2,351-meter stratovolcano, Mount Pico. It is the second largest island of the archipelago, after San Miguel, but also the most recent, with only 250,000 years of existence, a blip in the geological history of our planet. This situation had a profound impact on the availability of arable land. The volcanic soil, being relatively young, primarily consisted of vast quantities of hard rock with limited organic soil. Insufficient time had passed for erosion to break down the rocks into fertile soil. This geological reality is notably reflected in the name given to Pico by the locals, A Ilha Preta, the Black Island, due to the dark basalt rock covering its whole surface. The island is only home to a bit less than 14,000 inhabitants. The locals, called picarotos, have developed across the centuries white wines with unique characteristics. They are often described as salty and mineral by enologists, as well as the best expression of what volcanic terroirs have to offer. But what are the origins of this wine tradition? How and when did it start? Pico was discovered in 1427 by Diego de Silves. Settlement was not an obvious choice at first, and many called the island cursed, like the author Chagas, who described Pico in 1717, the monstrous, hideous, uncultivated island, with such dark stone that seems to have been devoured by all the fire from hell.
So in terms of the history of the island, you need to understand it the way conquerors saw it hundreds of years ago, right? There's a story that is told that the first people that came here, they quickly ran away because they thought this was so inhospitable that nothing could be grown in here.
According to Silvia Olivenza, only from the 1480s onward was Pico Island significantly populated by Portuguese, but also French and Flemish settlers. This was due to an agreement between Isabella de Portugal and the Duchess of Burgundy, who wanted to create a safe and neutral exile-like region for nobles from Flanders, where the Duke of Burgundy was invading this territory. As often with wine, the history of this beverage in the island started with monks.
Winemaking in the island was, from what we know, started by a Franciscan priest. So it said it came from Sicily in Italy, and with him he brought the first plant. His name was Pedro Gigante, or in a literal translation, Peter the Giant. He was said to be a very tall man, and he settled in Silveira, so a very small place here in the island, and that's where he started the production of wine. Obviously, because he needed it to do the service, the Sunday service. So that's really how it started here in the island.
At this point in time, wine production in Pico served primarily for local daily consumption and had not yet evolved into an export-oriented industry. The wine production of Pico was concentrated in the south of the island. That can strike people as something a bit counterintuitive, as nowadays most of the vineyards are actually located on the western side of the island around Maddalena. That's where the UNESCO World Heritage and the most impressive examples of vineyards are located. However, back then, the soil in these locations was mostly made out of hard rocks and was not necessarily the most obvious choice to plant vineyards. Things started to change when rich landowners in the neighboring island of Fayal started to buy land in this area. By the beginning of the 16th century, Pico had already gained a reputation throughout the Azores for producing the finest wine in the archipelago. This was due to its soil, which, even if it was really poor, pushed the vines to produce the most amazing grapes.
Of course, having no organic soil on the top of the vineyards means that the vines have a big effort to survive. So they are under stress the whole time. They have to find their way to survive in the rock cracks. I think the dimension that you feel in these wines comes also from that difficulty.
Its remarkable wine potential, combined with its proximity to Fayal, caught the interest of wealthy families from the neighboring island. They gradually began acquiring land around Maddalena, with the intention to establish vineyards. This marked a significant shift in the organization of the territory, particularly on the western side of the island. With the influx of investment, manor houses emerged along the coastline, belonging to these affluent families who primarily resided in Fayal. Additionally, religious orders such as the Franciscans, Carmelites, and Jesuits also owned some of these properties, adding to the transformation of the landscape. The owners of the land rarely visited Pico and were not actively involved in the work needed to extract wine from this barren land. Instead, subcontracted locals from Pico, facing economic hardship and unable to afford land, took on the task in order to support their families at a time when food shortages were common. These locals played a pivotal role in transforming the island's physiognomy. They initiated the process by breaking down the lava bed, known as lajitus, and poured imported soil from Fayal into the new openings before planting vines. The soil was quite expensive and was extracted from lands owned by the same wealthy families who possessed the vineyard land in Pico, further disadvantaging the local picarotos when it came to owning their own vineyards. However, planting vines in such a desolate soil that required intensive work and breakdown to yield anything was not the only challenge when it came to making wine in Pico.
The climate in Pico, it's very harsh, right? We have a lot of storms. This is a tropical part of the globe. fortunately, we don't get tropical storms, but sometimes we get very strong winds in the winter, high waves, and the vineyards, they are very close to the sea to use the most of the sun, and to have the least rain. So as you're climbing the mountain, there's a lot more humidity and a lot of probability of rain, right? So closest to the sea, you get less of that. So let's plant the vineyards the closest to the sea. With that, you get stronger winds. And with stronger winds, usually comes, if you're close to the sea, comes salt. A lot of salt particles from the waves. And so they needed to protect the vineyards from that. And with that, the cleaning of the spaces to plant the vineyards, they had leftover rocks. And so what they did to protect the vineyards was basically build walls. So the walls, they are built by hand. They have no cement, no glue, no nothing, no sticks, nothing. They are just rock on top of rock on top of rock, and you have walls with hundreds and hundreds of years. Those walls, they are built in squares, usually either squares or rectangles, but never round. So usually rock on rock, they would get at least at waist high. And the point was that you could see into the vineyard, but that the plant was protected. And with that, you would create a maze inside your vineyard. And the thing is that the better the maze, the quicker you were going through the vineyard to checking all, to picking all. And so it's a real science doing so. Obviously, nowadays we understand that it protects, right? But we also understand, for example, that the dark rock holds heat. Right, so in the summer, all the heat that the rock, either from the walls and from the bottom, can hold, it's then released during the night. So if you go to the vineyard, for example, in the early morning, and then you put your head lower, you can still feel the heat coming out of the rock. So that just helps the plant to grow and to feel, obviously, just very strong in the way it exists.
Finally, the holes in between the millions of small stones allowed the walls to be stable, but were also not offering too much resistance to the wind, allowing part of the breeze and water to come through, as well as some salt, which also contributes to the identity and excellence of Pico wine. That also meant that the salty Atlantic winds still do some damage to a percentage of the vines, reducing the yield, but also leaving the best grapes to be used for wine production. The vast expanse of stone walls, known as converge, stand as an impressive testament to the extraordinary efforts of the locals. It is astounding to note that if these stone walls were laid end to end, they would encircle the earth twice over.
There are places where you can see this kind of stone walls, but the size, the dimension of the area that the men built 500 years ago, so about 15,000 hectares of walls. It's one of the biggest constructions of the humankind, so that is very important.
So it's like a huge feature of architecture, because no one really told them what it did, right? They just saw year after year after year that it worked, and they just built more.
From the end of the 16th century onward, wine export became the main source of revenue for the people from Pico. The wine trade was a two-player party. While it was in Pico that wine was made, it could not be shipped across the ocean without fire. Indeed, there was a real lack of seaports along the coast of Pico that made the access to the island difficult during certain times of the year. And even the available anchorage areas could only serve smaller vessels. For this reason, Pico was quite isolated, and the only safe port for shipping wine globally was the nearby Bay of Horta in Faial. The wine trade led to the prosperity of the religious orders, the landed gentry and the upper class of Faial, who were the owners of the Pico Vineyards, and masters of the wine trade. The local picaratus did not really benefit so much from it. Originally, the wines were exported as fire wine, then as Pico fire, and only later as Pico wine, which clearly shows how much the balance of power between fire and Pico was in favor of fire. Until the middle of the 19th century, the commercialization of Verdillo wine was crucial to the economy of Pico. It is what made the island and the Azores known internationally. The quality of the different wines and demand within the archipelago soon led to the creation of a network of commercial routes to distribute the wine among various islands and abroad. Through the port of Horta, which was the main distribution center, the production from Pico was first sent to a regional market in the Azores, the national market in mainland Portugal and Brazil, and the international market in Europe and North America. Pico's fortified and late harvest wines represented the majority of the demand outside of the Azores during that period. They were highly sought after by all the elite in Europe and in North America.
If you read, there's a book about Pico wines. That book says, and there are evidence that the Declaration of Independence in America, the toast that they did, was with the wine from Pico. It was not with the wine from anywhere else in the world. It was a wine from Pico. It was a wine from Madeira. But also in the history book, there is the thing that for every 3 casks of Madeira wine, 2 were from Pico. So let's just call it Pico wine because it's easier and it's more truthful.
These wines were on the top list of Europe and the Americas at that time, so before the independence. These wines were on the top list of the kings, of the governors in Europe and in the Americas. So it has a lot of history. So it's very difficult to replicate this. It's unique.
This period really was the golden age of winemaking in Pico, and the time where the reputation of the island in the world was established. However, like all good things, it came to an end with the eruption of lots of grape diseases from the US, which ravaged the vineyards in Pico and initiated a massive change in the industry. For the odium between 1852 and 1854, and then the phylloxera plagues from 1872 to 1874 completely destroyed the Azores vineyards. Phylloxera proved to be the final blow to the Pico wine industry, inflicting devastating consequences on the livelihood of thousands. This minuscule insect wreaked havoc on the root systems of the majority of the vineyards on the island, leading to widespread destruction. Its origins can be traced back to the United States, where it was inadvertently brought to Europe aboard ships bound for the UK around 1850. From there, it spread rapidly across the continent before reaching Pico in 1872, decimating over 2/3 of the planted vines in Europe by the end of the century. In Pico, the plagues had a devastating impact on the vineyards, comparable to the rest of Europe, resulting in the destruction of most planted vines. Once boasting 150 wine producers at its peak, the island saw only a few remaining by the early 20th century. These diseases had a huge economic and social impact on Pico, since wine production had become a subsistence strategy, a locally adapted project in an island where cereal culture was less favorable. It wasn't just vineyard owners who were impacted, also everyone else who participated in the process of producing and transporting wine, such as barrel makers, cellars, basket makers, ox cart drivers, and day laborers. Soon, the vineyards became abandoned. Part of the population looked desperately for land to cultivate. Desertification, loss of soil, a ground that cannot retain rainwater, and the cursed land seemed to be back.
So after that, obviously, we had different periods. We had a lot of immigration, depended on, for example, the eruptions. Every time that the volcano erupted, either here or in Fayal, there was an immigration exit, usually to America or Canada. So that's the reality here. Every time that there's a natural disaster that it's not explained, people usually leave. And with people leaving lives the workforce, and without workforce, it's so hard to work this vineyards that if they leave, there's nothing to be here no one here to work.
During this period, half of the population from Pico and Fire Island migrated to the United States. As a replacement, whale hunting also became an alternative subsistence strategy for the locals. Sulfur was effective against odium, but the only solution for phylloxera was to switch from the autochthonous grapes, Verdillo dos Azores, Arinto, and Terraced, to disease-resistant vines imported from the United States. These hybrids, offsprings of the European and various American grape varieties, inherited resistance to phylloxera from their American parentage. Among these, a variety called Isabella, introduced to the island by American immigrants, became particularly popular. As time passed, the unique native grape varieties of the island began to disappear. Fortunately, a handful of dedicated vine growers in the old vineyards of Cria Silveria, next to Madalena, took it upon themselves to graft and preserve this precious heritage. The so-called North American new grape, Isabella, gave birth to a new style of wine known as Vinho de Cheiro, which dominated the island's wine scene in the following decades. Vinho de Cheiro became the wine of choice for everyday consumption and religious ceremonies, but fell short in comparison to the historic wines of Pico, and was not deemed suitable for export.
We have in the island still a lot of cultural traditions that are linked to religion. So the Isabella grape variety and a lot of the varieties that are used in Azores to produce the Vinho de Cheiro, they are basically just the American enxerto, so the American plant creating grapes, so just the natural process of it. So they are typically very acid. They don't get in, even the red grape varieties, they don't get a lot of alcohol, and they are used to produce a very typical traditional product. This is a very light red wine with a lot of acidity, very bold in terms of smoky flavors, obviously because of the soils. Low on alcohol, 10.5, 11 degrees. And if you think about this in a summer afternoon, a little bit chilled from the fridge, this just makes a wonderful treat. Well, you feel in Portuguese there's also another word for this. It's called morangueiro. The translation would be strawberry tree or strawberry. Right? If you smell it, it's like strawberries, red fruits, but in the sweet part of it, not that ripe or not that unripe part of it, but the ripe part, and you can really taste it. That's why it's called morangueiro as well. All that, obviously, you even yourself, you feel that you cannot drink a lot of it because it's very bold. In what it is bold, it is very bold. And so it's you drink a bottle, yes, maybe 2, 3, 5 glasses, but not more than that. And it's usually something that gives horrible hangovers, I would say, yeah. I don't know, but yes. So that's it.
Despite the significant damage inflicted on wine production during this tumultuous period, it provided an unexpected opportunity for Pico Rotos to establish a more equitable relationship with the vineyard owners of Fayal. Amidst all the destruction, the end of the 19th century brought the seeds of change to Pico, enabling the locals to regain control of the island's economy.
all the owners from the land, they were not from Pico. So Pico had the workers, Fayal had the owners. And the relation was very much compared to some sort of slavery. And I know it's a strong word, but works here at some point, because they used to work the land and they used to get paid with food and with essential means. Only when phylloxera eat and the sales from the casks of wine started to decrease, did the owners, so the doctors and the very important rich people from Fayal, started splitting the land. So the way that they paid the workers was giving them land. And that was the first time in all of history that the men from Pico had land in Pico. And that's really a conqueror's history, right? And from then, they started to divide it through families. And that's why at the moment you have such small parcels everywhere you go. So the vineyards, they don't have, for example, acres. It's tens of acres or hundreds. Usually you are talking about the division of an acre in 10. So, and maybe you have 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3 acres of land in here. So, and that brings us to the existence of the cooperative. There was the need to use a company to put all these people back together into a single family, let's say so that the wine production became more feasible, because producing wine here is very expensive, and the more together you are, the easier it is.
Through this fascinating journey through time, we have witnessed the rich and famous history of Pico wine rooted in the volcanic soil of the Azores, where locals have harnessed the untamed terrain to cultivate exceptional vineyards. The Courage alone stands as a testament to their determination and ingenuity. Through centuries of hard work and unwavering commitment, they have transformed the rocky terrain into fertile ground, capable of producing wines of unparalleled quality. However, the 19th century brought great challenges to the Pico wine industry, with the devastating spread of vine diseases. These destructive forces threatened to wipe out the vineyards entirely, casting a shadow over the future of Pico wine. The devastation caused by vine diseases, while terrible for the vineyards, paradoxically sparked a renewed vigor in the winemaking tradition. It led to the birth of a new wine style, known as Vineyard in the Azores, and led to the emancipation of locals from outside influence who gained full ownership of their vineyard. This chaotic period set the stage for the survival of the vineyard, as well as its incredible revival decades later. If the Azores were considered as a sleeping vineyard throughout most of the 20th century, in the past 25 years,
thanks to a few tenacious wine growers, the wine industry in Pico is going through a real renaissance, producing impressive wines and attracting the attention of the whole world once again.